Hey D&D fam, I'm Quick.
And I'm Lee, and you're listening to
Divas and Ducats. So what is a diva? I think divas get a bad rep, but to me, diva is all about the attitude.
As for ducats, it's your finances, your assets, Skrilla, guap, your coin. We're talking all things with the potential to affect your pockets.
And while we're attorneys by trade, we are divas by choice. Divas and Ducats is for edutainment purposes.
Y'all, we are not Series 511 or 703 professionals. This does not create a financial advisor or attorney-client relationship. The views expressed here are solely our opinions and the opinions of our guests.
It's just our opinions, y'all. Okay, divas, let's talk ducats.
Hey D&D fam, welcome back.
Yes, welcome back. And if you have been following us on Instagram, you know that we recently celebrated our 1-year anniversary.
Yes.
So we just want to again tell everyone thank you so much for liking, subscribing, following, commenting, and leaving all of the positive feedback throughout the year. And we plan to just do some more amazing things.
We got more coming.
Right?
You're stuck with us.
And I hope you have really enjoyed our last series with dating potential.
Yep.
And we got a lot of feedback from that series. So, the tidbits that you pulled from it and that were helpful for you all, we just, really appreciate your feedback. And today, what are we going to be discussing? What's on the Diva docket?
Today we got, it's National Women's History Month. And so we got a little black girl magic today in the building. We have an attorney. We're going to be talking about estate planning. She is especially interested in making sure our community has the tools that they need, hailing out of Texas. So if those of you who aren't in North Carolina, you get another spin, get more information because laws vary from state to state.
Right, for sure.
So the next voice you will hear, as they say at church, will be Iffy Ibekwe. And I'm just going to give you a little information about her because our guests know their stuff. All right. So as the founder and principal attorney at Ibekwe Law, PLLC, Iffy Ibekwe believes that every woman deserves to make decisions that affect her. A woman can accomplish these decisions with wills, trust, and other estate planning documents. Emboldening women is Iffy's calling, okay? And she's also passionate about speaking about entrepreneurship and supporting other women. She graduated from the University of Texas at the University of Texas School of Law. Also, she graduated from there and has practiced law for 14 years. She's the board president of the Be the Bridge, a national nonprofit dedicated to racial justice and reconciliation. And when she's not spending time with her remarkable husband and 4 spirited children, 4, she runs the signature We Read Her book club, which focuses on the study and discussion of literature authored by women of color. So she is booked and busy, y'all.
Booked and busy.
All right. So say hey to our guests.
Hello.
Welcome.
I'm so excited.
Welcome.
Thank you for being here.
Yes, thank you for being here.
You.
We are excited to have you.
Thank you for having me.
For sure. And let's get into this topic of intergenerational wealth through estate planning.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yeah, so tell us, how did you get into it? We love to ask our guests, what drew you into estate planning? What's your story behind that?
Yeah, I did not go to law school to become an estate planning attorney by any stretch of the imagination. I thought that I would go to law school and become an education lawyer. That's what I applied for. And that's what I spent the first 11 years of my career doing, is working in school law. And I actually worked at a company for 10 years. And long story short, I got fired from my job. And that was something that had never happened to me before. And it really did cause it wouldn't be a quarter life crisis, but it was something like a third life crisis, 30, whatever the 1/3 of life crisis was.
Right.
And I had 3 children. I had just had my 3rd child and thought I was done having children. Little did I know. And I decided to kind of let go of the law and say, you know what? I bet my talents are going to be needed or valued elsewhere. But I had left my children in daycare, and one of the moms was a financial advisor, and she asked me if I did wills, because when you're a lawyer, they just think you do everything.
Yes.
Right. Yes.
And she worked for this company where they would refer business to an attorney, and the attorney they were working with was putting the wrong names on wills.
Okay.
And I was just like, and he's getting repeat business. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
I was
Right.
like, I do now. And that is literally how I entered the field of estate planning.
Wow.
Because I had besides law school and taking the bar exam, I had no reference for estate planning as far as in my community, in my life. It just didn't seem like an area that was applicable to just a regular person.
Right.
I always built it
Right.
up as something that very wealthy people
Absolutely.
did. And so I just deep dove into learning all about estate planning and started taking courses and asking questions from lawyers who were already practicing, and just built my knowledge base like that.
That's awesome.
That is awesome.
And one man's mistake became your practice. Okay.
Right. And then you mentioned it and hit it on the head. Like we often think that it doesn't apply to us if we're not wealthy, right? We think it's for the affluent, for the grandiose. But how does estate planning affect the everyday, as we say, the regular person?
Right.
Right. And I love that term, regular degular, because I feel like I'm a regular degular person.
Right.
But every regular degular person who's 18, whether or not you're regular degular, you could be fancy. But if you're 18 and you have capacity to make decisions, you need an estate plan. And so when you make that the floor,
right,
a whole lot of us don't have estate plans.
Right.
I think the number for African Americans specifically might be 70 to 80% of people don't have any kind of, we're just talking a will, any kind of documents
That's
in
high.
place.
That's high.
And when you think about estate planning, yes, you have the stereotype of having land and estates, like big homes and mansions, but we all have an estate. And your estate is not only your property and the physical belongings and how much wealth you've built, but it also includes health decisions for your body. Who's going to help make decisions for you if you're incapacitated, who's going to have access to your medical records, who can help you make financial decisions if something happens. And that's a part that I think estate planning hasn't been marketed for, that because traditionally it wasn't built for people like us who look like us, which is why we are not we don't have traditions of estate planning. I always like to say, Black people were the wealth that was being passed down. And so when you think about that, a lot of families are very wealthy because they would pass enslaved people from father to son, right? And down, and that's how they built their wealth. And you see the effects of it today when you talk about intergenerational wealth, when literally built on the backs of people. And so just understanding at a base level that we all need something, and then building up from what that something is a great, that's a message I'm trying to get out there, especially to Black people. We have to open our eyes to see this now that we have more access, because systemically this is a very racist country, as we all see every day. So there are also reasons why people haven't done it. It's not just because they just didn't get to it. There are barriers in place.
And I'm smiling not at what you're saying, because what you're saying is a shame, really. But I feel like my line on this show has become, it always goes back to slavery.
She says it all the time. And I smiled too. I was like, oh, this is our girl right here.
Yes.
Because we talk about the same
gets
thing.
Me. So when a person, and you spoke to the fact that an estate is not just wills, although that's what people think of. So what are things that people should be thinking about, or maybe even accessing, when they think about getting an estate planning planning attorney? Or some of the things maybe they should bring to the table and kind of have accessible?
I think that there's a floor when it comes to estate planning and certain documents that everybody needs. Some of the things that you need are a financial or property power of attorney, depending on your state. Every state has these forms. And they're all called something different. One of them is for financial decision making. For example, in Texas, you can have somebody as an agent for you to make financial decisions, whether it's paying your mortgage, paying a recurring bill, or writing a check for something, if you are either incapacitated or you can have it go into effect immediately. So say someone is deployed or out of the country and they want to make sure a certain financial transaction is made. You can plan to have someone help you for that.
Okay.
There's also health directives, several of them. One's a medical power of attorney. It allows you to have someone come in and make decisions for you if you're ever incapacitated. It might be called a healthcare power of attorney, different names in different states. I think a lot of people think with these documents, well, if something happens to me, my husband or my wife or my family or my mama, no, that's not how it happens. You know, and a lot of people have this assumption that somebody else is going to step in and be able to have access to all your stuff. When's the last time you've gone to a bank and tried to access somebody else's account? When's the last time they let you in?
Not
right?
at all.
That part.
When's the last time you went to the hospital and you're like, I'm looking for this person. Tell me what room they're in, or you call up.
Right.
We have all sorts of federal privacy laws for financial transactions as well as medical that are not going to allow you, just because that's your baby or just because that's your sister, to get access to those things. And that becomes a barrier when you need someone to advocate for you. You see how our health outcomes are in this country, right? COVID-19 is ravishing the Black community, even more so the Latinx community, 2.8 times more likely to pass away from COVID than your white counterpart.
Right.
There's a problem. There's a lack of advocacy. A lot of things could be done in order to ensure that if something happens to you, you have someone helping you make decisions and not just at the mercy of the doctors or ethics board if they can't find anybody that can help you, right? Because you didn't put anything in place. And so a lot of times these documents are necessary, but when people need them, they can't consent to them.
Exactly.
And there you go. That's like, it's not going to happen to somebody like you because you're young and you can do that when you're in your 70s. You know, you'll be fine. You'll figure it out, right? No, we're seeing horrible outcomes. And so you have your other health directives like your HIPAA authorization. It allows people to come to get access to your health records. Very similar to what you would have at a doctor's office or a dentist's office. You can plan for that, right? And then one that's really important, and nobody likes to talk about this, but it's a living will. And a lot of people think a living will is your last will and testament, and it's not. A living will is an advanced healthcare directive that you would put in place if you ever end up having a terminal illness or a serious illness. Different ways of doing it in different states, but this is the general gist. And you're not able to consent for yourself. You can say what kind of medical intervention you'd want, whether you'd want life support, artificial feeding, and other interventions, a maximum pain medication. In Texas, you can request that. And we always joke in some of our talks that some people like moist lips, so they want to make sure that you don't get my lips and you get my ankles, you know what I mean? Like whatever it is, there are ways that you can put your wishes down, so you're not looking like, you know, Dave Chappelle on your hospital bed.
Don't have
and
me
so
ashy.
Tyrone Biggums.
Yes.
She said, don't have me ashy.
Exactly. And so these are the sorts of things you can put in place. And then lastly, I always want to emphasize how important it is to have a will, but also have a will, but I raise you one and say you should have a trust so that you can avoid going to probate. And that is not popular because a lot of people are like, get a will, get a will. That has been the marching cry. But when it comes to intergenerational wealth transfer, oftentimes a will is not sufficient.
Yeah. And so let's get into that because wills, having recently done my grandmother's, it's really hard to execute a will. It takes time to execute the will. So like you said, let's talk about trust. Like what is that vehicle and how does it differ from a will?
Yeah. So just to talk about the will, I think a lot of people maybe listening might be like, what do you mean a will is not enough? Right?
Yeah.
I believe that a will is the floor, especially when we're looking at racial wealth gap, where there's a report put out by Prosperity Now that said by 2053, Black people are going to be worth $0. There's already a 223, I believe, year gap between Black wealth and white wealth. Again, We know why.
Right.
Let's be
Yes, we
real. But there is work to be done because we're about to be hitting that transfer of wealth from the baby boomer generation down to the Gen Xers and millennials, or whatever they call us these days, right? And so that's 20 to 30 years, not only to get your affairs in order, but you need to help your parents and your elders get their affairs in order, and grandparents, for a lot of people, need to get their affairs in order. And not out of the mindset that, because that's coming to me. But when you think about Black people, a lot of times we are thought of as a collective because we have a communal nature to us, right? There's information that a lot of people will not have access to, right? That someone listening right now, I'm just planting seeds or watering them. I'm not expecting to make this happen, but this is one role we play, right? And so when it comes to wills, that's the floor, because a will allows you to say, this is how I want my property to be passed on when I die. It only goes into effect upon death. What happens a lot of the times when people have their assets passed through will, you still have to go to court. So unless you have a small estate, which might be $50,000 to $75,000, depending on where you are in the country, that means someone has to hire a lawyer to go to court and petition on your behalf of your estate and say, this person has passed away. I'm the person who's closing up their life. That costs time, that costs money. And if that will says, here's my one asset, it's this $250,000 house, and I'd like to leave it to my 3 children, which a lot of people do. They say, I want it to first go to my spouse if they have one, and then to my children in equal share, which is fine. That's fantastic. I'm pretty sure that's what my mom has done. The problem is, how do you split a house 3 ways?
You do not.
How? Especially if people live in different states, different cities, maybe one of them has debts that share would definitely help alleviate, back child support, student loans, and other things like that. So what usually happens is that asset is sold in order to give people cash. What is wealth in this country? Property is wealth. So that's land, that's real estate that maybe has no debt on it, besides property taxes, and now it's gone. And you can never get it at that rate that you whoever was passing it down got it, right? And so there are things that you can do, like set up trusts, and a trust is a mechanism for holding assets outside of someone's personal name. It can be, you can set it up as the person who's the creator of the trust. You could be called a grantor or a trustor, but I won't get into all the details of that. But basically, in that same scenario, if that person had left that house to their children in a trust, they could have stipulations saying, yes, okay, one of my kids is in Massachusetts, the other one lives in California, and one's in Texas. This house is in Texas. I don't want it to be sold. You can live in it. We can rent it out, and that income can be shared amongst 3 people. You can leave money to satisfy property taxes, which is a lot of the reasons why people don't take on homes, because they're like, oh, I don't want to pay the property tax. Let's just sell it, right? And you can keep that asset within the family by just setting it up within a trust and transferring that title into a trust rather than having it be an outright gift. These are some of the things that white people have been doing for hundreds, if not thousands of years, because it's a British system of, trust planning, and it gets really deep, right? There are all sorts of things you can put into a trust. You can put life insurance into a trust, investments, real estate, and you just think of a trust as a bucket, and assets are put into that bucket for the benefit of specified people, right? And it can go on generationally. The problem is, a lot of times people don't have a very long vision when it comes to our lives. So they think, I don't have anything. I got a bunch of student loan debt. I got a lot of other things I want to do with my money. I'm still building. And you hear about people always wanting to secure the bag. But why are we securing the bag? We need to talk about how to transfer the bag. Because what is the point of building all this wealth when you can't even hand it to your children?
What is the point?
I'm not even talking about your children's children, like the Beyonce and Jay-Z talking about wealth. Like, you can tell they've done their estate plan. But I'm just talking about to your kids,
Right.
Yeah.
without them fighting and breaking up the family because they had expectations of what was coming to them, right? And so these are some of the conversations that I have. They're not always the most popular.
They're not fun.
Because
No.
I think people are so busy building their portfolios with real estate and investment and Bitcoin. But I'm like, who's your Bitcoin going to? Right?
Right.
And if you're in Robinhood, they don't allow you to designate a beneficiary. So who's getting that money? Right? There are
Right.
problems in the system inherently.
Right.
And so this is like the missing piece when we talk about finances and getting out of debt or whatever is the buzzword. We never talk about estate planning.
Right.
Because you
Yeah.
have to face mortality and you have to think beyond yourself when it comes to that.
So one thing you mentioned that I wanted to kind of get it more into is you could put life insurance or that kind of thing into a trust. So maybe someone, let's say that they have a life insurance policy, right? And maybe they want the policy to cover the cost of that home, or they don't want people to get it in a lump sum, essentially. So how can you
Yes.
use that trust to bring that to effect with a life insurance policy?
There are several types of trusts that you can set up for life insurance.
Okay.
And just generally, the concept works like this. Instead of saying, in a scenario, say you have two minor children under the age of 18. And I'm so glad you brought this up. A lot of people have life insurance that's wholly inadequate.
Right.
So they may just have a $50,000 policy from their job that comes with the work, and it's like, yeah, I got life insurance, but that might cover maybe 1 year of work, right? So that's often a problem. But say you have $1 million life insurance policy, which is not very expensive to get depending on your age, right? It changes, and you want to leave that policy first to your spouse, right? And then the secondary beneficiary would be your minor children. That policy has problems because if something happens to your spouse, or say that first person that's an adult, your sister, your cousin, whomever you designate it to, and they can't get the life insurance, maybe they predecease you, and it then goes to your minor children. If they are under the age of 18, they cannot receive property without having somebody in place to manage that property for them. And so that ends up being a problem because now you have to go to court, figure out how to become the guardian, also probate the estate, because that life insurance is a non-probatable asset, which means it doesn't go through probate. So just because you say in your will, which you shouldn't have it in your will, that my life insurance is going to my kids, that does not control the contract that you have with that company. What you can do instead is set up a trust and say it's a Lee and Quick family trust, right? And we'll call it that. That secondary beneficiary or primary beneficiary can be the Lee and Quick family trust. And that money will be paid into the trust. That way, whatever the terms of the trust are, could say the house is not to be sold, the income and profits from the investments and the real estate are to be paid in these percentages to these beneficiaries. Look, I'm talking as detailed as you want it to be, okay?
Right.
There are so many ways to do it, but you can have instructions on how to manage the money that has been paid. The thing is, a lot of people don't realize many wealthy people in this country build their wealth with insurance.
Yeah.
But that means that they are not just thinking about their lifetime. And although there are certain insurance policies that you can get benefits while you're alive, but they buy these $1 million policies because they know it's going to go to my kids, or it's going to go to my niece, or this institution, or this hateful place that I want to make sure is going. I mean, like, everywhere is being funded by death. Okay.
Right.
And so what you need to do, if you have such a lump sum, you don't want to leave $500,000 to most anybody, right? That's a lot of money to leave, but you can leave that money for the benefit of someone that's managed by a trustee, which would be the person that manages the trust. And I don't want to get so in the weeds that it becomes so confusing, but just suffice to say, you can start a trust while you're alive and manage it, and then it can be funded upon your death and also continue afterwards. So that's definitely something to bring up with when you talk to attorneys and say, hey, I heard about this trust. How would that work for someone like me?
Yeah, for sure.
And can you talk about revocable and irrevocable trust?
Yeah. So the general concept is a revocable or revocable trust is a trust that can be changed. In the example I just gave, there's a very common trust called a revocable living trust. So in a situation like that, for example, I have one with my husband. We are the co-trustees while we're alive. And that means we can put various assets into that trust for the benefit of our kids and their kids, until the trust basically ends. If one of us passes away, the surviving spouse becomes the sole trustee, the way ours is written. When we both pass away, that trustee is the next person that we have assigned, and that trust becomes irrevocable or irrevocable. And so that just means it cannot be changed.
Okay.
And so there are various trusts where you can set them up at the beginning as an irrevocable trust, or you can have it transform into that later, or you can have part of it become irrevocable. A lot of times when people have children and they want to make sure their children aren't disinherited, they want to say like, okay, look, I know you might go on and marry somebody after me, right? And I want to make sure if you have a whole new family that our original family is taken care of. There are ways to set up trust so that your kids are protected. So or if you're in a blended family and you come together and you want to make sure that, yours, mine, and ours get what they have coming to them and protect, people do that with things like trust. And so just the general concept is revocable can be changed, irrevocable cannot be changed.
Got you.
Perfect.
I'm learning so much.
No, dropping a lot of gems. So your practice, you mentioned it earlier, but your practice has a distinct focus on women and, minorities. Where did that, obviously that passion of you being both, but outside of that, where did that passion come from?
When I was setting up my firm, it was all like a dream in my head. And so when I was deciding what kind of practice I wanted, I just started dreaming about who I would serve and who they were and what they watched and what podcasts they would listen to and what shows. And I used to listen to so many podcasts when I actually got to go places, but now I'm like, oh, that really, like with these kids screaming, I'm like, oh, I can't even enjoy like my commute listen, but just what they read and what celebrities were influential to them. And I just did a foundational values and mission. And one thing that I really feel called to encourage women, and it just sounds so cliche, but I really do. Even if I wasn't a lawyer, I'd just be doing this anyway. I would be telling people how that they are capable of so much. They deserve more pay and access and all of that, especially for women. I have 3 daughters. I didn't know I was going to have 3 daughters, but it now has like completely lit me up. Like I see how there's pay disparity and I just get so angry, I'm just like, we have the skill set and we need to know, we don't have to wait for men to come along to begin. And so with that temperament, I don't know if that's a temperament, I don't know what you would call that, but that fire I have, I wanted my law firm not to center the man or the family. I wanted it to come from a point of view of the woman, because that woman is going to be connected to her spouse, her parents, and her children, and her community. And it has been a phenomenal marketing standpoint to go that way. I actually didn't even know if I could. And I contacted, lawyers always have all sorts of rules about advertising. I contacted ethics and I said, is it okay to say that I am a law firm for women? Is that allowed? And the woman was like, oh, where were you when I was getting my estate plan done? Because what I get a lot of is women come in and they say, yeah, I'm ready to do this. Do I have to have my spouse on board, or is it okay if I just make my spouse do it? I'm like, well, if they're becoming a client, they have to consent on their own free will. But it's often an entree into the area of estate planning because there's no procrastination there. They want to protect themselves and their assets and leave behind instructions. And this, when they read about my firm, they're like, oh my gosh, breath of fresh air. I didn't even know I didn't know I was looking for this because we don't advertise well as lawyers. It's really bad out there. Right. And so I just started doing it as long as I could do it. I just said, sure, let me write some copy too. I don't want it to be scales of justice. I'm going to look cute and
Right.
go downtown and take a bunch of pictures of myself, which I had never done.
Right.
Because I want them to know, hey, I'm like you. I think it's fun to do things with color and with life, and to have joy in my law practice. So.
Yeah, because they do often think of attorneys as being stoic. So when you show that, like you said, the color and the vision, and just making that attraction part of it as well, like it does definitely draw.
And just relatable.
Yeah, very relatable.
Yes.
Yeah.
And think about the stereotype for what I do. Who do you think of when you think about an estate planning lawyer? Do you
A
think
white
of me?
man.
White man.
A white man?
Old white
Old white man.
At my meetings, old white men who manage a lot of high net worth individuals, and then manage their children, and then manage their children. And that's just generational work. That's another reason that we're not in this game, is because nobody is trying to come and make sure that we're doing that for our families and our community.
Yeah.
I barely see women.
Right.
Of any color. It's not a system built for us. So I am truly a unicorn in that respect. So I think it's also easier for other people to approach when they don't necessarily feel like they will get the service they want because they don't look the part.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I could definitely see that being intimidating, you know?
Yeah,
for sure.
And one of the things that made me think of is already, like you said, the conversation. No one wants to think about them dying, even though we know it's going to happen one day, right? And I think a lot of times, sometimes elders can be a little cantankerous about having these discussions, and even from the other side of maybe sharing with, you know, those who might benefit in a way from your death. So how would you, you know, just as a professional, first, do you think you should have these conversations in terms of your plans for your estate? And then if so, like, how do you suggest maybe going about making those conversations as comfortable as possible?
Right. And this is a really big question, because when you think about a lot of women our age, we're in a sandwich generation, right? We have people who have come before us who are adults, and then people who are coming after us that are younger. And so you kind of reach up and you reach down on top of being in building years of our lives, right? But if you look down the road, one of the things that we also don't talk about is the cost of long-term care. By the age of 65 currently, 69% of Americans are going to need some sort of long-term care. And that's just basic bathing, feeding, clothing, like just think of a baby, that kind of care, right? On average, women need that kind of care for 3.7 years of their lives. Men, about 2.2 years, because men don't live as long as women, right? And so that's with today numbers. And we have that forecast available. When you think about who is going to provide that care, this is all from the Department of Health Services. I'm not making up these numbers. Health and Human Services. I'm not just like, just gonna make up some numbers.
And had decimals too.
I think the stat was about 80% of that care is provided by women.
Absolutely.
And that care is on average 20 hours a week. And you know, I always say I get fired up about pay equity and access, and the fact that women can do, as far as I'm concerned, anything, right? As long as we don't have barriers in our place, in place. This is actually a barrier that is coming for a lot of us. Taking care of our elders, taking care of our parents or siblings or other members of our family, because there has been no planning in place. And so that's one way to enter the conversation, is not, hey, what you got coming for me? Because I think a lot of people think that you should just start talking about what do you want to do with your house? What do you want to do with, you know, like nobody wants to be accosted and asked about what's going to happen when you die. You know, that is not the way to come into it. One way to come into it is to say, you know, one of the things I did, I decided to get my affairs in order. I got a will. I prepaid my funeral. You know, it could be a shock when you start saying things like this, especially at our age. They're like, are you planning to die? Well, no, but I am planning, right? And so that's always a great way to enter the subject, is to say, this is what I did, and let me tell you about it. And it felt so good. And I want to talk to you about your legacy and what you want to what you want to be remembered for, right? What do you want your grandkids to remember you for? What do you want your community? And start having conversations where you talk about, record it, you know? We got to put down the history of our elders and make that a normal conversation to have. Because I think when we start having these sorts of retrospective conversations, words of wisdom that you have, then you can start saying things like, you know, I've been thinking about what you were sharing about how you want to make sure that your church goes on. What are some ways that you would want to do that? Would you want to leave them money? And just, you know, your family member. So you know what's an appropriate ask. And this is not a one-time conversation.
No.
This has to be a conversation that is normalized and had repeatedly. Because it's not something that we do, but a lot of people who do estate planning, they have family meetings where they sit with the lawyer and talk about estate planning, and they get their tax form for the trust so that they can file that with their personal taxes. And then they start grooming the younger generation. Okay, you turned 21, you turned 18, here are your documents to execute. And okay, now you've just had a baby, let's go ahead and set up a trust. They just do that because that's just normal. And I'm not talking ultra wealthy. I'm just saying that when I started my practice, I got a lot of blue collar white people that were saying, yeah, my daddy said it was time to come in and get my estate planning done because I'm going to receive the family. You know, I got 40 acres that nobody wants, right? But they were keeping their land. They know that's important. Or if in that similar situation, we have a lot of people who live in rural parts of America who have land and have had it for generations, right? But you may live in the city and not really think that's a big deal. But that land could be squandered, sold, and you don't know what is happening in another generation where the next hot spot will be. And so you want to talk about, hey, what are we doing with the family land? Is it going to 13 heirs? Because the next generation, it might be going to 80 heirs. That's a problem. So there are things you can do to plan for that. And just, you know, I'm on Clubhouse sometimes. I started this club with my friend Portia Wood called the Black Trust Fund Kids because we want to normalize Black children having trust funds and not make that something that is not for us. It is for us, and it's how we are going to pass down wealth. And one of the things that we do, we have a room called Don't Sell Big Mama's House. Because oftentimes Big Mama's house is in some place that was very undesirable due to segregation or crime or whatever. But as we see, gentrification. Okay, Big Mama stayed in that pit, and now it is worth millions, or in a generation could be worth millions of dollars, depending on where the trends are. We want to preserve those assets and try to hold on to real estate because real estate and land, they generally appreciate. And so I don't even remember what the question was, but I just got on my soapbox.
It was just having a conversation, which you're doing.
Have a conversation.
And I think that's just so important. Like, we don't understand the importance, like you said, of property and real estate. You know, I don't, like you said, don't want the headache of paying the taxes. Let's sell it. Like, you just sold all this property, so you wouldn't have to pay $2,000
right,
or probably
if you think
less.
About it, but even if they are $3,000 over a year, you can break that down into
and
a car payment.
especially if it's split between three people, we just have to understand the importance of property and real estate because our grandparents did.
Well, what the importance of sacrifice? Because I think that sometimes, let's be honest, there are some people who don't have. So. And a lot of times the people who, when we talk, brought up the gentrification, those folks who sold out, they couldn't see long term because they didn't have.
Right. Yeah,
you know what I mean? So I think sometimes it's thinking about, okay, $3,000. I got to come up with $300 a month. What do I spend $300 a month on? That might mean, like you said, if it's three of us and each of us is going to pay 4 months of the property tax, that might mean that month I didn't get that installment.
Right.
Because that's how much, between your sewing, the actual bundles, and the installment, that's your $300.
So that's the first thing I go after.
Well, no, you got to make it make sense.
Massages,
the bundles, and that might be that month. If it's three of us, okay, I know that I need to get my installment on a different month.
That's a wig month, okay?
Right.
It is.
That's a ramen month.
Yeah, but I definitely, and also like in those, we also just have to take the secrecy out of things. Like, I don't know, we are very secretive within our own conversations within the Black community. And I always say, if your secrets are eventually going to affect me, then we need to talk about it. Now, that's health.
Absolutely.
You know, you don't want to talk to me about what's going on in the doctor appointment, but like you said, in 10 years, I'm the caretaker now.
Yeah.
Because of things you didn't want to talk about.
It is affecting your whole life.
Yeah.
Your secrecy is my future burden.
Right, exactly.
Right,
we have to talk about those things. So, you know, if it just sits in a comfortable, and I think you made a very good point. It's easier to come to the table and have a conversation with somebody when you're already doing those things.
True.
So, yeah, if you could tell them, I pay, you know, like you said, I pay for my burial, it will make them be like, oh, okay. You know,
like, oh, I'm gonna
why?
Who's going to pay for mine?
Right.
Yeah. Why?
Even if it's a why, and it opens up that conversation, but to come at it like, you need to do this, and they looking at you like, well, what did you do?
No.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So when you set yourself up first, it just makes those conversations either way, they have to be had.
They do.
We just have to.
For sure.
And I would like to say on the burial note, like I always say, a reminder, whenever you see an elderly person crowdfunding or somebody asking for a fish fry to bury their loved ones,
Right.
that is a trigger. And I want everyone who's listening to think, have I gotten my estate planning done?
Right.
Because we should not be donating to those things.
Right.
I mean, there are exceptions where someone dies and they're young and it's not something, but there are people who also plan for that too. I mean, I understand the stigma around it, but there are ways to plan for these things, so that you're not fish frying your grandma or crowdfunding on Facebook to give your loved one a dignified burial.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that is a humiliation that we don't have to experience, and there are inexpensive ways to plan for that. So, yeah.
One thing, and I just thought when she was saying 18 people, because one of my parents is one of 10, and I'm just like, when my grandmother goes, I don't know. We'll see. But one of the things I thought of, yeah, we're gonna have to see. But you know, she's 91, so we'll. Yeah. They're stubborn, but it made me think of the question we talked about. So one of our previous episodes, we talked about prenups, and which can also be a very touchy subject for some. And so in a situation where, because you know divorce happens, so in a situation where maybe one partner was just strongly against a prenup, or they just never got one for whatever reason, how can a person protect, you know, those heirs, or you know, people that they wanted to give to, in the event that there is a divorce now and there's no prenup, there's nothing saying that, you know.
So it's going to vary from state to state, because some states, I believe 13, have community property laws. So short of a prenup, if you don't decide to have some sort of prenuptial agreement in place and say, this is what I'm bringing to the marriage and I want to keep it my own and separate property, and you mingle your assets and you build wealth together. Think of like the Jeff Bezos and his wife who helped him build Amazon, right? That's their divorce. She was entitled to her contributions at 50%, which is why she is also very wealthy now. I mean, she was also wealthy. All should have been wealthy, you know, that's a whole other conversation. But she built, listen, as far as I'm concerned, she built that company, okay? Right. There's certain things that I'm just like, okay. But there are situations like that where you don't have a prenuptial agreement. So Texas is a community property state, and so in that instance, there are certain divisions that might happen upon divorce. When you're separating property, right? One of the things that some people do is they come in with separate property before they're married and maintain it separately. So if you're someone about to get married, but you're not going to get a prenup, but you know, like you've owned this home before you got married, or you have certain investment accounts that are never commingled, they're in your name, you don't commingle or mix it with any other. There are other ways to keep that separate, and that's something that that you can do. In other states, I'm not sure how it works, but I believe that you can give property to whomever you want by designating who should inherit that based on your state. And so that's something that you want to talk to a lawyer about and figure out what the best way is for separating property. Other times when people are doing wills, they'll do marital property agreements, which is basically, maybe we didn't have a prenup, but I just want to say that it's like a postnup, right? This is going with me, and this is going with him. If you have someone who refuses to do any sort of planning like that, but you get divorced, when your assets are separated through the whole divorce process, at that point, you need to do another estate plan if you've done one before to figure out where you want your wealth to reside and with whom. A lot of people forget this. I had a client for a probate matter, and his parents were filing for him. He never changed his life insurance after his divorce. And so his ex-wife was entitled to the entire almost $500,000 life insurance policy. And you know what they do when you have life insurance to an adult? They pay it that next business day. So they just ask for your bank account and transfer money like you've never seen. Right? Which is why it's also very important to make sure that your life insurance and stuff is titled correctly and that the beneficiaries are correct, and change it every time they pester you. Do you need to change? Yes, check it, change it. If you're divorced, you don't want your ex getting your life insurance. And there are certain circumstances, depending on what type of plan you have, where that can happen. In that instance, I had to call and email her and say, hey, would you mind disclaiming this to your ex-in-laws? And she did. She disclaimed 50%. And so that is a possibility.
That was nice of her.
Very unlikely.
Right.
Okay. I would not take. And these are the sorts of things you have to think about with life insurance, estate planning, which includes life insurance. I talk about life insurance a lot, but it's actually not something I sell, or it's just something that can really help you build wealth. So in instances like that, when you talk about people don't agree, they're coming together. If you're coming together and you already don't agree, you need to get some stuff separate and keep it separate. That's for somebody who's outside. If you're together and you don't agree, there are certain things that will naturally stay with you or with that person based on how you set up your estate, right? Or what state you're in as well. So it can get very complicated. But the bottom line is, if you end up getting divorced from someone and you don't have a prenuptial agreement, make sure you follow up by changing your estate plan or establishing one. Because if you don't, there are things that you may have in place from a previous one that you think are invalidated, but they may not be. And that also goes for these non-probate assets, like any investment accounts or life insurance or retirement. You want to change those things in order to make sure that they work.
Yeah, Team Petty, when you get separated, go ahead and change that name, because if you get back together, you can change it back. But no.
And so me and Leah have actually had a conversation. Well, it was kind of hypothetical and not hypothetical, right? So receiving property, like your parents did what they were supposed to do, wills, trusts, all the good things, right? And so the children, 2, 3 kids, now have the properties, and let's say, child number 3 gets married and doesn't want to do the whole prenup thing with his spouse, but he has interest in this inherited property. How can, and then he gets divorced.
Oh, yeah, that could squander your property.
Yeah. So I think it's just so many ways to, even when a person is proactive in doing what they're trying to do to create that intergenerational wealth for that heir to go and unravel all of it quickly.
Yeah, your sibling or your cousin could mess up your whole inheritance, right? And so that's another reason that trust planning makes sense, because you want to protect that asset. You want to get as many things out of your name as possible.
Right.
And you don't want to share stuff in other people's names, because that, I should say this, when you share things with other people as an inheritor, as a beneficiary, you also share their drama, their divorces, any garnishment of wages, liens on their, property. Right. And so sometimes that is satisfied by selling off assets. And if you are part owner and they can make any kind of claim to that asset having to be liquidated to satisfy a secured debt or some other way that creditors can see your receipt of assets, that could end up making them file a claim to own, to get their pay. Yeah. And that's another reason, when you die with a will, everything is public. And so you have to post it. And what happens is the creditors, the banks that you owe money and you haven't paid off your credit card, they're like, I am owed X amount of dollars out of this.
Right.
And they see who's getting it. So not only do the dead person or the decedent They can see what they have as far as debts, and then the beneficiaries. They can see, oh, okay, well, you owe us on this, and you've walked away from that, but I see you've just come into
Right. You just
a nice
came up
sum
a
of
bit.
money.
Yeah.
Right. And so they will come after it. And so one thing a trust does is that it keeps that out of the court system, and then it's out of anybody's name, so that there is more protection there from creditors trying to get in. Now, trust is not a tax evasion strategy, because I think people just think you put things in trust and don't have to pay taxes. That's not how it works.
Right.
And currently, the estate tax amount in the United States is $11.7 million as of 2021 per person. And so it's a very high amount for the average regular, as you said earlier, person.
Yeah.
And so that number is sunsetting in 2026, which means it's going to be probably at most $5 million. And when you talk about people having investments and homes that are worth a lot and growing, it also will make you have to look into estate planning, because there might be tax consequences on gifting to the next generation.
Yeah.
And I should also add, Texas doesn't have death tax or estate taxes for the state level, but many states do. I know Massachusetts, it's $1 million. So listen, if you don't have a trust, you're squandering your estate.
You gonna pay that.
That's good.
So, and this is, you might have something else. My last question, just because I'm more familiar with wills, so I'm not sure, this might be a really simple question, but I know with the will you can contest it. Can someone contest a trust?
Yeah, people can contest it. If you just think about it, you can pretty much contest anything. For example, if you feel like there is some sort of mismanagement of the trust, and just depending on what kind of access you have, sometimes the beneficiaries contest it, but that's something that sometimes it keeps people blind. I'll say this about trusts generally. It's harder to see what's within it if you are not privy to it. So you can be disinherited and have really no right to see it. And one of the downsides of setting up trusts like that I've seen in some of my friends who are trust fund kids is that it can be used as a tool to control your children. I mean, if you look at, I don't know if you ever watched the show Succession on HBO. I love shows about trust and estate planning, where they're trying to keep on their dad is this Rupert Murdoch character. He's a media conglomerate scion, and they are basically wanting to make sure like they're in his good graces, because he might die soon, and they want to make sure that they're not disinherited, right? So they want to keep on the good graces of the lawyer. They are trying to please dad all the time, and there is a manipulation to that, because I think sometimes when it comes to inheritances, there is a presumption that you are getting something, especially when you have any kind of asset. It doesn't matter if it's $10,000. If 1/4 of that is yours, people will fight.
Oh, yeah.
And the one thing that I would have to say about contesting any sort of estate planning is that you want to make sure that in a contest, if you play it down the road, which is why it's really great to talk to an estate planner when you're setting things up, and not just do it out of the library or on LegalZoom. You can tell this stuff is very complicated, right? Part of that should be, how is this going to affect your family? Is this going to bode well for your children when you're gone? That this child is getting 50% and the other two are getting 25%. Whatever it is, that they're getting a car, or this one's getting the house because they're the youngest. Have you explained why?
Right.
And I try and say, please, as much as you can, no one has a right to determine what happens to your estate. Short of having some state laws or some marital agreements and that sort of thing, right? As far as someone who's a beneficiary, they have no right to anything. You can be disinherited. I disinherit people on my clients' wishes all the time. And there are no contest clauses which say things like, if you contest this and you're a beneficiary, you're getting nothing. Those are challenged often, right? People still challenge them. And so there are other things that you can do to set up and make sure that your kids know what's going on and that they are prepared. And communication is a really helpful tool in that.
Really important.
Yeah, it is. And you kind of hit on my last question, which was the legal Zoom. So I will preface this with I am a lawyer and I am getting a lawyer to do my trust. So I do not suggest you do not hire an attorney. But for those that are hell-bent on doing everything themselves, how do you even create a trust? Like, we know that, some of the simplicities of a will needing, the witness and
a notary.
Yeah, like you can make it, of course, in law school, they're like, you can write it on a napkin. They just make it so simple to do a will. But how do you even create a trust? Does it have to be done at the bank, or like, are there stipulations in a trust the way it is in a will?
Just like I would never want to change my own engine,
right,
or do my own filling, or perform any surgery on my own knee. Right? Yeah, there are some things that you should not do.
You should just not do it.
Nope.
And that's just like, you should not be creating your own trust.
Right.
I will even say for a will that you can follow, like, I need 2 witnesses who are over the age of 14, and I can say all to my wife and sign it, which has been, I think it's a estate planning, like the most basic will that was ever validated, not in the US, but overseas, was someone writing that on the wall on their deathbed and signing it.
Oh.
When it comes to trust, absolutely not will I ever even attempt to tell you how to do that.
Right, right.
I feel like that is a horrible thing for anyone to delve into without proper training. And as you just said, even lawyers are like, I don't know the first thing about setting up a trust.
Not gonna do it.
And so if you've gone to school and you've done all of that training and you still feel like that's not an area I'm comfortable with, just like, I can't do a bankruptcy.
Right.
I can't do a divorce.
Right.
And so and I'm a lawyer. It's just like any professional, just because you do one thing doesn't mean you can do other things within that profession. Right. So I would strongly discourage anyone from setting up a trust. Truly do not, because you'll probably mess it up. And there are lawyers who shouldn't be doing it because they don't know what they're doing too. And that's another thing, when you find someone who says that they do all these areas of the law, chances are they're not doing any of them too deeply. Right.
Doing them well.
So when it comes to your estate, when you think about all you're working for and what you want to pass on to the next generation, the causes, institution, and people, family, then you probably want to go ahead and pay for that to be done.
Amen.
Well, this has been absolutely wonderful and informative and such a wealth of information. We really, really appreciate you coming on Divas and Ducats and passing along this information. And so tell our guests where they can find you at.
You can find me. I am on Instagram at the Just In Case Lawyer. If you are in Texas and you are looking for an estate planning attorney, I am at willsintexas.com. And my personal website is iffyibekwe.com if you're interested in finding out more about becoming an estate planning lawyer. Or I am also writing a book on wealth and the racial wealth gap and how to empower people who are not old rich white men in estate planning, and give a really how-to step-to-step guide, how-to guide step-by-step on how to establish your estate plan and the questions you need to be asking your lawyer and the information that you need so you feel like an informed consumer. So that hopefully is coming out next year. I've been working
we'll be looking for
on it. I'm really excited about that because I feel like it just lends credibility when you can have someone speak with a cultural competency about issues that are may be particular to certain populations that have been ignored. I hope that it's a blessing to other people. And I'm also on LinkedIn, Facebook, wherever you Google me, I'll probably come up. So I'm on the interwebs.
We love it. And we will have her information in the show notes. And as we say, in the meantime and in between time.
All right, bye.